When Emily, a mistreated assistant, discovers her arrogant boss Jackson plans to fire her, she crafts a daring scheme to dismantle his career. By luring him into believing he's landed a dream job in Dubai, Emily watches with satisfaction as his ego drives him straight into a trap. But just when she thinks her revenge is complete, Jackson's mysterious wife, Caroline, emerges with a shocking revelation, and an even riskier proposal. As Emily dives deeper into a web of deceit and betrayal, she realizes her quest for justice may have unforeseen consequences. How far is she willing to go to bring Jackson to his knees? And will she escape unscathed, or has she set a trap for herself as well? I used to believe that keeping my head down and doing my job would get me through anything. But the day I started working under Jackson Trent, that belief crumbled like sand under a wave. Every day felt like a battle, though I wasn't fighting back, I was just trying to survive. He wasn't just a bad boss. He was a tyrant. Jackson had this way of walking into a room that made everyone shrink. His tailored suits and blinding white teeth weren't just about professionalism, they were weapons, designed to make sure you knew he was better than you. He'd strut into our open office like a king inspecting his kingdom, always finding something, or someone, to criticize. And more often than not, that someone was me. I'd been his assistant for a year and a half, though it felt like a decade. My job was to keep his schedule, answer his emails, and handle all the little things he couldn't be bothered with. But no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. "Emily, is this your idea of organization?" he barked one morning, waving his phone in the air. He'd missed a meeting, and somehow, it was my fault, even though he'd told me to cancel it the day before. "I thought you said," I started, but he cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Don't think, Emily. Just do your job." "Is that so hard?" The humiliation burned, but I swallowed it down like I always did. There was no point arguing with him. Jackson was the kind of man who thrived on power, and the more he could make you feel small, the bigger he felt. The worst part wasn't even the yelling, it was the mocking. Jackson didn't just point out mistakes, he made sure everyone around knew about them too. If I brought him the wrong type of coffee, he'd announce it loud enough for the whole office to hear. "Oh, look, Emily's trying to poison me again with this sludge she calls coffee." How thoughtful. Every time, the office would go silent, the air thick with discomfort. My co-workers never joined in his taunts, but they didn't stick up for me either. They were all too scared of becoming his next target. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here to make friends or win his approval. I just needed the paycheck. My mom was recovering from surgery, and her medical bills were piling up faster than I could keep up with. Losing this job wasn't an option. But everything changed the day I overheard him talking about me. It was late afternoon, and most of the office had cleared out. I was at my desk, finishing up some expense reports, when I heard his voice from the conference room. The door was cracked open, and I couldn't help but hear him. "She's a liability," he said, his voice low but firm. "If we're looking at cutting costs, she's the first to go. Honestly, I don't know why we've kept her this long. She's barely competent." My stomach dropped. I knew Jackson didn't like me, but hearing it laid out so coldly felt like a punch to the gut. "Jackson," another voice said, it sounded like Mr. Simmons, the regional VP. "Are you sure about this? She's been with us for a while." "That's exactly the problem," Jackson replied. "She's been here too long without proving she's worth it. A monkey could do her job." I sat frozen at my desk, my heart pounding in my chest. He wasn't just complaining about me, he was planning to get rid of me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice, "A monkey could do her job." Over and over, like a mantra. By morning, the fear had morphed into something else. Anger. No, rage. For the first time in my life, I felt this burning need to fight back. But how? Jackson was untouchable. He had the kind of charisma that blinded people to how awful he really was. Management loved him because he delivered results, no matter how many people he stepped on to get them. Taking him down seemed impossible. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Jackson's biggest weakness wasn't his temper or his arrogance, it was his ego. He thought he was invincible, smarter and better than everyone else. That arrogance was a crack in his armor, and if I aimed just right, I could split it wide open. That's when the idea hit me. It started as a flicker, just a small, dangerous thought. But the more I entertained it, the more it grew. By the time I got to work that Monday, it wasn't just an idea, it was a plan. I was going to take everything Jackson cared about and turn it against him. It started small. I needed to know what made him tick, what he valued most. Luckily, he wasn't shy about bragging. Over the next few weeks, I paid extra attention during his rants. "I've worked too hard to settle for mediocrity," he'd say. "People like me don't just climb the corporate ladder, we leap to the top." He loved talking about promotions, about the next big opportunity that was surely coming his way. He'd drop hints about wanting to move to a higher position, maybe even in another city, or another country. Dubai, he mentioned once. A friend of his had just taken a job there, and Jackson wouldn't shut up about it for days. "The tax benefits alone are incredible," he said, spinning his pen between his fingers. "And the perks? Luxury housing, private drivers, first-class travel, it's the dream." That was all I needed to hear. Over the next month, I stayed late at the office almost every night, not because I had extra work, but because I was laying the groundwork. I created a fake email address and set up an online persona, Victoria Channing, the hiring manager, for a non-existent global consulting firm based in Dubai. Victoria's LinkedIn profile was perfect, just polished enough to be believable, but not so perfect that it seemed fake. I added a few connections in the industry, using names I'd pulled from real profiles. Then I sent Jackson a connection request. He accepted within an hour. From there, I started building the trap. Victoria sent him a message a few days later, congratulating him on his impressive career and casually mentioning that her company was looking for a high-level executive to oversee their expansion into the Middle East. Jackson responded immediately. "I'm intrigued," he wrote. "Tell me more." I almost laughed out loud. He was practically salivating. I fed him just enough information to keep him hooked, details about the imaginary company, the perks of the job, the high salary. I made it sound exclusive, like they were only considering a handful of candidates, and Jackson was their top choice. The more we talked, the more reckless he became. He started skipping meetings to have private calls with Victoria. He'd disappear for hours, locked in his office, while I watched from my desk with a smile. It was working. My plan was working. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, watching Jackson squirm in his own delusions became the highlight of my day. He had no idea that the strings of his supposed dream job were being pulled by someone who he believed wasn't even capable of brewing a decent cup of coffee. What made it even better was how much of himself he poured into chasing this fake opportunity. He stopped berating me as much, not because he had grown a conscience, but because he was preoccupied. I saw him spending hours on LinkedIn, updating his profile, carefully curating his accomplishments. He even started coming into the office earlier, likely to give off the impression that he was going above and beyond to his imaginary recruiters. I'll admit, I didn't think it would go this far at first. I thought maybe I'd plant the seed, and he'd spend a few sleepless nights dreaming about it before giving up. But Jackson's desperation to validate his ego was deeper than I realized. And the deeper he went, the more satisfying it became. Victoria Channing sent him a detailed message outlining the Executive Director of Global Strategy position. It was perfect for someone of his caliber, I explained, triple his current salary, a luxury housing stipend, first-class flights for business travel, and a guaranteed seat on the company's International Leadership Council. He didn't question a thing. It wasn't enough to keep up the illusion through emails and LinkedIn messages. If I wanted this plan to work, I had to make it bigger. More tangible. So I created a website for the fake consulting firm, Atlas Global Solutions. It wasn't anything too flashy, just a clean, professional-looking page with a company history, some generic buzzwords about innovative strategies and driving global change, and a list of fake executives whose names and faces I pulled from random stock photos. I knew Jackson would look it up eventually, and when he did, he'd find exactly what he was expecting: legitimacy. Sure enough, about a week after I sent him the link to the website, he called me into his office. "Emily," he said, gesturing for me to sit. For once, his voice wasn't dripping with condescension. In fact, he sounded almost pleasant. I sat cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "You've been doing a decent job lately," he said, leaning back in his chair. That was as close to a compliment as I'd ever gotten from him, and I nearly laughed at how hard it seemed for him to say it. "I'm going to need you to step up in the coming weeks. There are some opportunities I'm exploring, and I need someone I can rely on to hold down the fort here." Opportunities. The word hung in the air like a secret he couldn't resist keeping. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Of course. Anything you need." "Good," he said. "Keep my schedule clear for next Thursday. I have a call with an important contact." I knew exactly who he was talking about. Victoria Channing. The call was the riskiest part of the plan so far. Up until this point, everything had been done through written communication. But Jackson was growing impatient, and I could tell he wanted more direct interaction. So I improvised. Using a voice-altering software I found online, I recorded a message as Victoria, thanking him for his interest in the position and setting up a preliminary interview over the phone. It took a few tries to get it right. The software had a tendency to make me sound robotic if I wasn't careful, but eventually, I nailed it. When Thursday rolled around, Jackson shut his office door and took the call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I didn't need to. The smile on his face when he emerged 20 minutes later told me everything I needed to know. "Big things are happening, Emily," he said, patting me on the shoulder as he walked by. It was the first time he'd ever touched me without disdain, and it made my skin crawl. I nodded politely, hiding my satisfaction. Big things were happening, all right. Just not in the way he thought. As the weeks went on, Jackson became consumed by the fake promotion. He started spending less time on his actual work and more time preparing for his next chapter. He even began dropping hints to the regional VP and other senior managers about his exclusive opportunities. "You have to think big to move up in this industry," I overheard him telling Mr. Simmons one afternoon. "And sometimes, that means making bold decisions. You'll see soon enough." I almost felt bad for Mr. Simmons. He clearly thought Jackson was just being his usual arrogant self, but he had no idea what was coming. Jackson's behavior didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the staff either. He stopped micromanaging, stopped snapping at people over small mistakes. Some of my coworkers joked that he must have started therapy, but I knew the truth: his focus was elsewhere. I started planting the seeds for his downfall. Subtly, of course. When the regional VP mentioned Jackson's recent lack of follow-through on a project, I made a passing comment about how he'd been locking himself in his office for hours on end. "I think he's working on something big," I said innocently. It wasn't a lie. The final stage of my plan required precision. I couldn't afford to leave any loose ends. Victoria Channing sent Jackson an official-looking acceptance letter for the Executive Director of Global Strategy position, congratulating him on his successful interview process. The letter outlined his starting salary, benefits, and a timeline for his transition, including a request for him to formally resign from his current role within the next 2 weeks. The moment he received it, Jackson's ego exploded. He printed the letter and showed it to one of the other managers, who passed it along to someone else, until half the office was buzzing with rumors. By the end of the day, everyone knew Jackson was leaving. "Have you heard?" Mia, one of the senior accountants, asked me as we crossed paths in the break room. "Jackson's taking some huge job in Dubai. It sounds like a big deal." "Really?" I said, feigning surprise. "Good for him." Inside, I was grinning. 2 days later, Jackson made it official. He stormed into Mr. Simmons's office and slapped down his resignation letter like it was a winning lottery ticket. "I'm moving on to bigger and better things," he announced to the office as he walked back out, his chest puffed out like a peacock. "You'll regret losing me." No one looked particularly upset. I kept my head down, pretending to focus on my work, but my heart was racing. He had no idea what was waiting for him. For the first time in months, I felt powerful. I'd spent so long letting Jackson make me feel small, like I didn't matter. But now, the tables had turned, and he didn't even know it. I watched as he packed up his office, chatting with anyone who would listen about his exciting new adventure. He even gave me a condescending smile as he left for the last time. "Take care, Emily," he said. "Try not to mess things up while I'm gone." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Jackson was walking straight into the trap I'd set for him, and there was no way out. Jackson's departure from the office was celebrated, not by him, of course, but by the rest of us. The atmosphere felt lighter, almost giddy. It was like someone had finally turned off the oppressive heat that had been suffocating us for years. The man who had ruled the office with an iron fist had left, convinced he was on his way to bigger and better things. But I knew the truth. Jackson wasn't headed for glory. He was headed for disaster. Still, I couldn't let myself celebrate just yet. The next phase of my plan was already in motion, and it required perfect timing. I'd spent weeks setting the pieces in place, and now it was time to let them fall. 2 days after Jackson officially resigned, I got an alert on my phone. It was a notification from the fake email account I'd set up for Victoria Channing. Jackson had landed in Dubai. I could almost picture him strutting through the airport, grinning like he owned the place. He probably thought he was about to start the next chapter of his illustrious career, complete with luxury perks and tax-free income. But what he found waiting for him was something entirely different. The address I'd provided in the welcome packet from Atlas Global Solutions led to an abandoned office building on the outskirts of the city. It had taken me weeks to find the perfect location, a spot that was believable enough to pass as a corporate headquarters but obscure enough to avoid scrutiny. When Jackson arrived, he'd find nothing but empty rooms and peeling paint. The next message came later that night. It was a single, furious email from Jackson to Victoria Channing. "What is the meaning of this?" I arrived at the address provided, and it's a vacant building. There was no one there. No offices. Nothing. This had better be a mistake. I read it twice, savoring every word. I could practically hear the desperation in his tone. The mighty Jackson Trent, reduced to panicked emails, frantically trying to salvage his crumbling fantasy. I didn't respond right away. Letting him stew in his confusion felt like a fitting punishment for all the times he'd left me sitting at my desk, waiting for instructions while he berated me in front of the entire office. The next morning, I sent a short, vague reply. "Mr. Trent, we are investigating this issue and will get back to you shortly. Please remain patient as we resolve the matter." It was the corporate equivalent of a brush-off, and I knew it would drive him insane. The fallout was even better than I'd imagined. Over the next few days, Jackson's emails became more frantic. He demanded answers, threatened legal action, and insisted he'd been scammed. Of course, he wasn't wrong. But there was no one for him to fight against. Every email he sent to Victoria was met with either silence or a vague, automated response. The LinkedIn profile I'd created for her disappeared entirely, as did the fake Atlas Global Solutions website. It was as if the company had vanished into thin air. The final blow came when Jackson tried to return to the States. Unbeknownst to him, the rumors of his promotion had spread far and wide. By the time he realized the job was a hoax, his reputation in the industry had already taken a hit. Word traveled fast in corporate circles, and Jackson had burned too many bridges for anyone to feel sorry for him. One of the managers he'd insulted in the past, Greg Henson, a quiet but shrewd guy from accounting, had gleefully told everyone who would listen that Jackson had left for a high-level role in Dubai, only to be duped. "I guess he wasn't as smart as he thought," Greg said with a smirk. When Jackson tried reaching out to his old contacts, they all turned him down. Some didn't respond at all. Others offered polite but firm refusals, saying their teams were fully staffed or their budgets didn't allow for new hires. The truth was, no one wanted to work with him. Back in Dubai, Jackson was spiraling. His emails stopped coming, but I knew that didn't mean he'd given up. He was likely scrambling to piece together some semblance of a plan, but there was nothing for him to hold on to. I imagined him sitting alone in a cheap hotel room, staring at his laptop, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. For a man who had spent his entire career climbing to the top, the fall must have felt like it would never end. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far. It wasn't a passing thought, I really did sit with it for a while, trying to weigh the morality of what I'd done. But every time I thought about stopping, I remembered the look on Jackson's face when he called me incompetent. The way he'd humiliated me in front of my coworkers. The sheer audacity of him believing he was untouchable. No. He deserved this. The moment that cemented my victory came about a week later. Mia, the senior accountant, forwarded me a screenshot of Jackson's LinkedIn profile. He had posted an angry, rambling update that read like a manifesto. "Beware of scammers pretending to offer legitimate opportunities. I have been the victim of a coordinated scheme to defraud me of my time, money, and reputation. These predators will stop at nothing to take advantage of hardworking professionals. Learn from my experience, verify everything before you make a move." The post was filled with spelling errors and uncharacteristic typos, a clear sign of his unraveling. He'd always been so careful about his image, but now, he was too desperate to care. The comments were a mix of confusion, pity, and thinly veiled amusement. "Wow, that's rough," one person wrote. "Sorry to hear that happened to you, Jackson. Maybe next time, vet your opportunities more carefully." Another comment simply said, "Yikes." It was over. Jackson returned to the States shortly after that. I heard through the grapevine that he'd tried applying for a few mid-level positions at smaller companies, but no one would touch him. His reputation as an arrogant, self-serving tyrant had preceded him, and now, it was his downfall. The last I heard, he was bartending at a dive bar downtown. Mia told me she'd stopped in there once, just out of curiosity. She said he didn't recognize her, but she recognized him immediately. "He looked tired," she said. "Worn down." "Did you talk to him?" I asked. "No," she said, smiling slyly. "But I did tip him $1. I laughed harder than I had in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. I wasn't scared of Jackson anymore. He couldn't hurt me, or anyone else, ever again. And the best part? He'd done it all to himself. Sure, I'd set the trap, but he was the one who'd walked straight into it, blinded by his own arrogance. Justice, I realized, doesn't always come in the form of legal action or public shaming. Sometimes, it's quiet, personal, calculated. And sometimes, it's exactly what's needed. For weeks after Jackson's downfall, life felt peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't dread going to work. The air in the office was lighter, conversations were easier, and people were even smiling. It was as if Jackson's toxic shadow had finally lifted, and with him gone, everyone was free to breathe again. I was proud of what I'd done. Sure, It was risky, and some would argue I went too far. But watching Jackson lose everything after all the misery he'd caused. It felt like justice. Or so I thought. It started with a phone call. I was sitting at my desk, mindlessly responding to emails, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something about the timing made me pick up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. A woman's voice responded, low and sharp. "Is this Emily Hart?" "Yes, who's this?" There was a pause, followed by a laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "You don't know me, but I know you. My name's Caroline Trent. I'm Jackson's wife." My stomach dropped. Wife? Jackson had never mentioned being married, not once in all the years I'd worked for him. But before I could say anything, she continued. "Don't hang up. I know what you did." I felt the blood drain from my face. My grip on the phone tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," Caroline said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I've been going through Jackson's emails, his messages, everything. He's been too busy wallowing in self-pity to notice, but I put the pieces together. The fake company. The job in Dubai. The woman he thought he was talking to, Victoria, wasn't it? That was you, wasn't it?" I didn't respond. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how much she knew and whether it was enough to ruin me. "Relax," she said, her tone suddenly lighter. "I'm not calling to turn you in. Frankly, I think what you did was genius." That caught me off guard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said. "Jackson's a narcissistic bastard. You're not the first person he's humiliated, and you won't be the last. Honestly, I've fantasized about doing something like this myself. But you actually pulled it off. Impressive." I didn't know what to say. Was this some kind of trap? "But," Caroline continued, her voice hardening again, "there's one little problem. Do you have any idea how much money he lost because of your little stunt?" "No," I said hesitantly. $50,000, she snapped. Flights, hotels, relocation expenses, all of it gone, because he thought he was starting a job that didn't exist. And guess whose money he was spending? Mine. I felt a pang of guilt I hadn't expected. I'd known Jackson's ego would be his downfall, but I hadn't considered the collateral damage. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. Caroline laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Don't be sorry. Be smart. I didn't call to scold you, I called because I want something in return." "What do you mean?" "I want out," she said bluntly. "Out of this marriage, out of his life, out of everything. But Jackson is stubborn, and divorcing him won't be easy. He'll fight me for every penny, and I refuse to come out of this empty-handed. That's where you come in." "Me?" "Yes, you. You're clearly good at manipulating him. I've seen the lengths you went to just to get back at him. I need you to help me push him over the edge, just a little further. Enough to make him give up, sign the divorce papers, and leave me the hell alone." My heart was pounding. This was insane. "I don't know," I began, but Caroline cut me off. "Think about it, Emily. Jackson destroyed your life, didn't he? He tried to get you fired, humiliated you for years, made you feel like you were nothing. You've already started the job, why not finish it? You owe him nothing, and I'll make it worth your while." "What do you mean?" "I'll pay you," she said simply. $10,000. All you have to do is keep messing with him. Feed him another lie, send him down another rabbit hole. Make him desperate enough to sign away everything without a fight. And when it's over, we both walk away happy. Deal?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was asking me to go beyond revenge. What I'd done before was personal, but this was something else. "Why me?" I asked finally. Because you've already proven you can do it, Caroline said. And because you have more reason to hate him than anyone else I know. So, what's it going to be? I hesitated, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to say no, to walk away and leave this whole mess behind. But the other part, the part that remembered every cruel word Jackson had ever said, every smirk, every moment of humiliation, wanted to see him fall even further. Fine, I said eventually. I'll do it. Smart choice, Caroline said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I'll be in touch. The next few weeks were surreal. Caroline and I worked together in secret, crafting a new web of lies to trap Jackson. This time, the stakes were even higher. We made him believe he'd been offered a last-minute, consulting gig, with an international firm that was willing to pay an exorbitant fee for his expertise. All he had to do was sign a few contracts that, thanks to Caroline's lawyer, also included a clause waiving his claim to her assets. Jackson, desperate to recover from his humiliation in Dubai, jumped at the opportunity without reading the fine print. He signed everything. When he realized what he'd done, it was too late. Caroline filed for divorce the next day, and Jackson had no leg to stand on. He'd given up his rights to her money, leaving him with nothing but debt and regret. I thought that was the end of it. But one evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. Well played, Emily. But don't think I've forgotten. Jackson. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Was it a threat? A warning? Or just the last gasp of a man who had lost everything? I didn't know. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Not yet.